when you look at the space shuttle, you see the United States flag and the NASA logo. Or when you look at the Orion launch vehicle, you see the ESA logo. There's actually a lot that goes into figuring out how to put those stickers or decals on the vehicle. It's not like a bumper sticker you just stick on your car.
After discussing about the Artemis project at large with Jeremy Parsons from NASA Space Kennedy in episode 1, and about the SLS with Elkin Orina, again from NASA in episode 2, and after talking to ESA's group leader Nico Detman about the European service module in episode 3, and by the way, if you missed them, go and check them out before going ahead with today's episode. Today we will talk about the last fundamental part of Artemis 1, Orion. And speaking with me about Orion exclusively for Space Café Radio, today's guest is
Kerry Timmons. I'm the Systems Engineering Manager on the Orion program at Lockheed Martin, and I am responsible for requirements management, integration, and human interfaces.
Kerry, welcome to Space Café Radio. It's a pleasure to have you with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. So how is the mood at Lockheed Martin? It's getting close to the launch. How are you guys feeling?
It's getting very close to the launch. We're all so excited. There's definitely a lot of energy in the office at work and just among our space community as we near the launch date.
This is your first lunar or deep space mission or not?
Yeah, I've been working on the Orion program for a while, but I've also had an opportunity to work on some of the other parallel projects that NASA is working on right now, like the Deep Space Gateway, which will be an orbiting platform around the moon, and some advanced concepts for what it looks like going to Mars. So, more of the recent architectures related to going to the moon and beyond.
Fantastic. And I can see you were not around in 1969 because you're too young, definitely. But I wonder what brought you into this field? What attracted you about space industry and engineering?
Yeah, I come from a long line of space enthusiasts. I remember as a little girl being out in the backyard with my dad in our constellation book, looking up at the night sky, trying to find Cassiopeia and the Orion constellations. So started out pretty young, and I'm actually second generation. Both my parents worked for Martin Marietta, which is now Lockheed Martin. So you could say I was just destined for this
Definitely,
business.
Yes, absolutely. Like you were born for that. That's actually sound fantastic. It means that they transmit you the passion, and that's the one of the best gifts the parents can give us, the passion for their job. So it's great. So tell us something about Orion. What is about? What is it?
Well, Orion is a key element in NASA's deep space exploration architecture. So it's the vehicle that'll transport humans off the Earth's surface and to the moon, and someday even beyond the moon. But it's part of the larger NASA architecture, with including the Space Launch System and the Deep Space Gateway that I already mentioned.
Can you give us a virtual tour of Orion? Because many of us will never see it if not on TV. So how big it is, what is its shape, how is it inside?
Yeah, actually, there's several elements or modules that make up the overall Orion spacecraft. So I'll start with the crew module. That's where the astronauts will live and work. And it's where we keep a lot of the advanced avionics, all the computers and electrical power systems that the crew needs on a mission to the moon.
How big is the crew module, just out of curiosity? How big is it?
The capsule is 11 feet tall. I guess I should say about 3.5 meters.
Thank you.
Yes. And then it's about 5 meters wide at the base.
And how many crew can fit? 4, right?
It can fit 4. Yeah, it's 316 cubic feet. I can't do the conversion on that one.
No worry.
But it holds. It's big enough for 4 crew members, and we can plan for missions up to 21 days without any other vehicle supporting us.
Okay.
So there's actually quite a bit of room in there. We can reconfigure it, fold the seats down to make up more room for the crew to perform science activities and exercise, all those things.
Mm-hmm. I know it looks a bit like Apollo, the crew module, but I suppose there are some differences because obviously it's a different type of architecture, a different mission, 50 years apart. Which are the main differences?
Right. No, you're right. It does look a lot like Apollo, and that's because physics hasn't changed. It's still the most efficient shape for transporting people off the Earth and bringing them back safely. But there are a lot of changes. It's much bigger. It's 30% bigger than the Apollo capsule was. So I mentioned we can transport 4 crew members. They were only 3. The electronics are so much more powerful. Our vehicle management computer, or VMC that we call it, is 25 times faster than the computers on the space station, 400 times faster than the space shuttle, and 4,000 times faster than Apollo.
Okay, so it definitely is an improvement. Sometimes we forget that the science behind, the tech behind Apollo was kind of like basic. I remember that there were like interesting comparison between the amount of computing capacity on the Apollo and the amount of computer capacity and memory in my smartphone. And my smartphone was more powerful than the computer on the Apollo, something like that. So we forget that actually the Apollo science was fantastic and mesmerizing also because it was quite basic in a sort of way.
They were doing everything for the first time. They were breaking a lot of ground. So it's impressive what they did, but technology has continued to advance and we've taken advantage of that and improvements for Orion.
Absolutely. And what is your specific role in the mission? What do you actually do for Orion at Lockheed Martin?
I work in the systems engineering area. So specifically, we start at the beginning looking at all the requirements. What's the mission? What does the spacecraft need to do? And we work all that into the lowest level of detail at the component level. And then we verify all those requirements. We make sure what we designed and built actually does what we intended it to do. And along the way, we look at all the interfaces and make sure the electrical connections are working, make sure the mechanical interfaces work, make sure all the bolt holes line up with the things they're attaching to, and we've got the right size fasteners. And then the crew interfaces, which is really the fun part, right? How the astronauts are going to interact with the spacecraft. What do the displays look like? What kind of hand controllers do they need? So we work through all of those details as well.
So since you have such a in-detail knowledge about Orion, tell me, what has been the hardest part to build? Or what is the most fragile one? The one that you look at it and you're like, this was tough, this was difficult, this has been like a very fragile component or something that gave you trouble during the process of building.
Yes, this is hard. And I actually believe that's why many of my colleagues entered this business. We enjoy solving the hard problems and we get to do something different every day. There's been so many different challenges we faced in the beginning, looking at all the different environments that are so challenging, so much more challenging than the LEO environment. Significant radiation, more thermal variations and temperature extremes. The spacecraft was too heavy, so we had to really look at our architecture and understand what level of redundancy was needed and try to consolidate a lot of different functions into a single component. Maybe one that's more relatable is decals and logos. When you look at the space shuttle, you see the United States flag and the NASA logo. Or when you look at the Orion launch vehicle, you see the ESA logo. There's actually a lot that goes into figuring out how to put those stickers or decals on the vehicle. It's not like a bumper sticker you just stick on your car, right?
Damn.
We have to consider, okay, if we have it made of vinyl or paint, how does that material interact with the surface we're putting it on? So we do temperature tests, thermal cycle tests on that. Or is it going to outgas? Is some of the material from the logo going to affect other surfaces on the vehicle? So that was an interesting one and more challenges than you would expect in something.
A lot of discussions about it, I can see.
Yes, exactly.
The challenges are already so high that the last thing you want to happen is that the logo is going to give you some trouble. That's actually very interesting detail. Thank you very much, Kerry. from my understanding, the most delicate part of the mission is the return. So Orion is one of the only two modules that is going to actually come back to Earth. And I understand that it's going through a very difficult, fast returning phase, like getting into the atmosphere, going super fast, heating up, and then splashing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Can you help me to understand this phase? What is actually going to happen to Orion?
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you already know a lot about this, but you're right on. It's so important to get the return phase right. One of our primary mission objectives is to demonstrate the heat shield performance at the lunar reentry speeds. It's coming in very fast, and so that heat shield is going to get very hot. It'll experience temperatures up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it'll have to keep the structures just a few inches below it, less than 500 degrees. So a lot of engineering and design analysis tests went into getting that just right. But then after we get through the entry interface, the vehicle will start its descent through the atmosphere, and they'll go through a series of events to deploy the parachutes.
Of course, because it has to slow down, otherwise it's too fast.
Exactly. So drogue parachute deploy, a main parachute deployment, and then it'll splash down off the coast of California. I guess one thing that's unique about Orion, too, is that we're going to perform what's called a skip reentry. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yes, I read about it, but I did not understand what was. I understood the comparison of the skipping of the stones. But if you could explain me what it actually is, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. The skipping of the stones analogy is perfect. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're using the Earth's atmosphere to help slow us down, and we'll essentially skip off the top of the atmosphere, re-enter slightly, and then that slows us down a little bit and reduces the G-forces that the astronauts will experience. And it allows us to land even closer to the shore, so we don't have to have the recovery forces spread out all over the Pacific Ocean, and we can get the crew back to land safely. It was something that was discussed and talked about during the Apollo days, but they didn't have the computing power to do it. It was too risky. So this is one of the areas where advancements in technology have allowed us to do this more complex maneuver.
So during the Apollo, they were just shooting.
They were coming in fast and hot,
straight.
Yes.
Obviously, Artemis 1, we know its goal, we know what's going to do. It's going to go around the moon. So the Orion is going to perform a sort of circling around the moon. It's going to go way beyond. Am I right?
You're right. We'll actually go as far as 280,000 miles from Earth.
Which is a lot, exactly. Is it the furthest distance reached by...
It is.
Exactly. Okay.
It is. It's the furthest distance for a human spacecraft vehicle.
Right.
And so when the crew flies, they'll go farther than humans have ever gone into space. But yeah, I can walk you through the day of launch.
Yes, please.
So we'll launch from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And the Space Launch System will go through a series of burns, and then once the fuel on that is used up, the Orion vehicle will perform some maneuvers and burns to get on a translunar injection interface, and it'll go out to the moon where it'll perform a lunar flyby, and it'll get as close to the moon as about 100 kilometers.
Okay.
And then it'll enter what's called a distant retrograde orbit, so a little farther from the moon, more like 70,000 kilometers from the moon. And then it will do one more lunar flyby at the 100-kilometer range to use the moon's gravity to help us get back to Earth, and then go through that entry, descent, and landing that we already talked about.
Discussed. So what's going to happen after Artemis 1? I know that Artemis 1 is the first step towards something bigger.
Yeah, as excited as we are about Artemis 1, Artemis 2 is just the next level of excitement, because that'll be the first crewed mission.
Exactly,
so,
yes.
Yeah, taking the astronauts, as we said, farther into space than humans have ever been before, orbiting the moon and coming back. It is interesting, the first Artemis 1 mission will be between 26 and 42 days. It actually depends on the specific day that we launch and where the relationship of the Earth is to the moon.
Interesting. And how many Orion spacecraft will you build?
Yeah, so we actually have several Orion spacecrafts in build right now at different phases of build. So obviously Artemis 1 is ready to launch any day now. Artemis 2 is getting ready to do some system level performance testing. And Artemis 3 is about ready to go through some environments testing, making sure that structure is capable of sealing in a vacuum environment. But we've got Artemis 4 and 5 and 6 right behind it.
Okay, you're ready for the next decade.
We're ready.
of moon exploration. How do you feel? What is your feeling towards Artemis and the future of human exploration on the moon?
It's exciting to live during this time when there's so much energy and investment in space exploration and particularly human space flight. So I'm really excited to be part of it and just proud of all of the accomplishments that we've made to advance human space flight. And I do think it's a game changer. I mean, there's something about the human spirit that just likes or needs to explore. And this is the next realm of exploration for us, right? We can go to the moon and understand what it is like to set up a base camp and live on another body, another part of our solar system.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And it's going to be the first time that we're going to stay there for a longer period.
That is another big difference from Apollo. They were learning and understanding, but they were always coming back. We want to go and stay for longer.
Exactly. So the day of the launch, what you going to watch? Where are you going to, where your eyes are going to be?
Well, I have so many colleagues who are going to be, some at the Launch Control Center in Florida supporting the mission, a lot at the Mission Control Center at Johnson Space Center in Texas, monitoring the telemetry and making sure all of the mission features happen as they're supposed to. I'll likely be in Florida with my family, watching the rocket and the Orion spacecraft go into space.
What's the worst thing that could happen that day?
I'm not even going to think about it. It's all going to be good. It's going to go exactly as we planned.
Correct. That's the spirit, Kerry. That's the spirit.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add that I didn't ask you? Something that I'm missing out? Something that I don't know about Orion and you want to tell me? So
you asked a lot of great questions, and I love your enthusiasm for this too. I guess one thing we didn't talk too much about was what's going to happen during the mission. I kind of skipped over that when I was just talking about the trajectories, but we have some really interesting payloads on the spacecraft that I'm excited about. One of them is actually a partnership with the German Aerospace Center and an Israeli company to study the radiation environment and the impacts of that on the future crew. So we have this experiment called MARE. It's the Matryoshka Astrorad Radiation Experiment. And the Israeli company, STEMRAD, built a vest to protect crew. And the German Aerospace company developed some torsos, human torsos, that'll be instrumented to measure the radiation effects in the lunar environment. So we'll be getting a lot of data from that experiment and excited to see what we can learn there and how we can protect the crew on future missions.
Fantastic. Kerry, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I love to see the involvement. I love to see all the passion that there is in the mission. And I'm really, truly looking forward to talk to you again for Artemis 2, of course, since this is just the beginning.
That's right. This is just the beginning. Thank you so much, Emma.
Thanks to you. Bye. Thank you very much for listening to the last episode of Waiting for Artemis. If you missed out the previous episodes, please go and find them on our website, SpaceWatch.Global, or you can download them from Buzzsprout or Spotify. That's it for now. This is Emma, and I will see you next time. Ciao!